today, speaking to you directly about some important issues that, that students face in their education. I wanted to start out though by talking a little bit about the larger project that brings Dr. DeChavez to campus, and that is the National Endowment for the Humanities grant that was awarded to Triton College in 2019. And this is an ongoing project that will end at the end of 2022. Our school decided to apply for a federal grant that would give us $100,000 to create new courses for our students. We noticed that Triton's curriculum was not as up to date as other colleges. The credits that we offered that count for human diversity credit were too limited, and we wanted to increase these options for our students at Triton College. So I've had the great honor of working with 5 fabulous faculty to put together a group of new courses that are now available for enrollment and are being piloted here at Triton this fall. So I want to take a moment to recognize the faculty on this project. Mrs. Gail Cranebuell, who put together a section of Rhetoric 099, which focuses on Black resistance. Dr. Christina Brophy, who put together a course, Humanities 175, on race, gender, and class in the United States. Mr. Maxi Armas, who put together Humanities 165, Latino and Latin American Studies. A special section of Speech 134, which covers diversity in theater performance. And then also I was able to develop a class in the Humanities, Arts and Culture and Global Perspective. And I'm so excited to see that there are so many students from our new courses that are in attendance today. When you jumped online, it asked you to rename yourself by your first name and last name. And also, if you are in one of these grant-sponsored courses, to put your course number down. That helps when we generate the list of attendance to give you credit for being here. And I also want to thank you very much for being a part of this today. Triton College is an institution, like most institutions, that's going through a lot of social change, and you're part of that change. The more we hear from students, the more we hear your voices, the better institution we can be to serve you. So I'm so excited that you showed up today. Now, with no further ado, I do want to move the spotlight to our speaker for today. This is Dr. Yvette DeChavez. She was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. She was a first-generation college student, and she earned her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin, where she also taught literature and writing courses. Her work in life focuses on implementing anti-racist and anti-colonial teaching practices at all levels of education. In her free time, she enjoys making jewelry, taking long walks to clear her mind, and writing short stories. Currently, she lives in Austin, Texas with her fiance and lots of books and plants. So we are so excited to have you here today, Dr. DeChavez, to speak with us about yourself and your journey, to hear about your vision, and to hear about and to hear your voice on issues that matter to students who are first generation college students, marginalized college students, and I think all students can benefit from the message that you have. So if we could start out, can you talk a little bit about yourself and your academic journey?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today and for inviting me to speak to everyone. It's a huge honor, and I'm really excited to have this conversation, one that obviously I think is incredibly important to have. And so I'm just really grateful to be here. So thank you for that. And I will, yeah, so I'll start just by talking a little bit about myself. As you mentioned, I'm from San Antonio. I am a first generation college student, which basically means that my parents did not go to college. And so I, it was kind of a journey that was foreign to me in that I didn't have a whole lot of guidance when it came to the experience. And so, I considered myself a pretty outgoing student when I was, working my way up through elementary, middle school, high school. One of the stories that I like to tell is that when I started high school, I didn't have any friends there, right? I didn't know anyone who went there. So I started off just like sort of by myself. And by the end, I was voted class speaker for graduation, right? So that kind of speaks to what kind of person I was. I made friends very easily. I, knew everybody, by the end of the experience, and, charismatic enough to be voted class speaker, which I think says a lot,
Yeah, sure.
And so when I got to college, it ended up being a different experience. I found myself being a lot more reserved and just kind of quiet in my classes, which was super unusual for me because that's not how I was. I was kind of the person that never hesitated to raise my hand and
Yeah.
dive into whatever topic was, up for discussion. And when I got to undergrad, it was just totally different. I felt like everyone sort of had these, the answers to all of these questions that I just didn't understand. Like maybe they'd been handed some sort of guidebook that I never got. And then, eventually I started realizing it kind of was that, because these people had parents who went to college, or they had parents who were professors, they sort of knew how to navigate this system that I did not know how to navigate. And I felt like, not only that, but maybe the place where I came from, I wasn't getting the best education. And so I was thrown into this situation where everyone had read all of these authors that I'd never heard of, or, they'd taken these other classes and had some general knowledge about these subjects that I just did not come into the picture with.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just stayed to myself the entire undergraduate experience. I didn't really make any friends. I can count now, like, I think I have 3 people that I know from undergrad. And, we're not exactly tight or anything like that. I just didn't make any friends. And I think so much of it had to do with the fact that I felt like I didn't belong in this place, and I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know how to navigate it.
Yeah. It sounds like you were this blooming teen, feeling very confident about yourself in the world. And then you had this experience that you didn't even know this side of yourself that was suddenly shut down or shut in or shut out.
Exactly. That's exactly what it feels like. And when I look back, that's kind of, how I sort of see it in the story of, my story. That's what it feels like too, is like I went from being someone just really outgoing to someone who kind of lost herself and just didn't know who she was or where she belonged in this place. And then I went to graduate school and it only got worse is what I would say. Yeah, so I ended up deciding to go for a PhD in literature. And that was really this experience that, I kind of grew up thinking like, I want to be an English professor, which is a huge deal. I watched a lot of TV, I read a lot of books, and being a professor sounded like this cool thing to me.
Sure.
So I, went forward on that path, having no idea what that meant or what it looked like. I just, read up, okay, you have to do this thing, you have to do this thing, you have to take this test. So I really did the most basic things of trying to get into a PhD program. I didn't know that all these other people were like taking classes for the GRE, or, just like I didn't know people were taking classes for SATs to become better at those, or that they were getting help with their essays to apply for school. I didn't know any of these things existed.
Yeah.
And so again, I kind of took the most basic route for getting into a PhD program, and luckily got in. But as I told you, I got in on a diversity fellowship.
Yeah. Say a little bit about that. I mean, it sounds like you were feeling out of place, but still striving academically and persisting, but having a hard time thriving.
Yeah, I would say that's exactly what I was doing. I was kind of going through the motions of this thing because I had this end goal of one day being a professor. And so I'm very much like a person who thinks of this goal and then just like wakes up every day and take these little steps to get to that place.
Mhm.
And to, I would say to my detriment, whether or not I feel good about it, right? So
Mhm.
even though I didn't feel healthy, I didn't feel like I was thriving, I was still making these steps because I said that this is what I wanted to do. And so I pursued this route, no matter how I was feeling about it, which is something I'll speak to later, about what eventually happened with that. But yeah, so I ended up getting in on this diversity fellowship, which I didn't even know that that existed. What happened was I got waitlisted for graduate school. And then I got a phone call from the advisor, from the graduate school advisor. And he said, hey, you have been invited to join us for the class of 2009. You got in on a diversity fellowship. And I'm like, okay, that's amazing. I hear the word fellowship and that sounds like important in some
Sure.
way. But he said to me, don't think that this makes you any less than anyone else. It's an important thing. It's a competitive thing. And we just need you to get your sea legs. And we know that you're not ready to handle like the actual graduate program. So you have this year of money to help you. And so I was like, what? I never thought it was something that I should consider myself lesser than other students for. I mean, you say the word fellowship to me, and I think that that means I'm being honored in some way.
Honored with,
Um,
which is the best kind of honor.
exactly, right. But then, of course, when you hear those words, you start thinking, like, okay, does that make me less than these other students? I'm
Mhm.
clearly, because I'm not allowed to teach, and they're all teaching right now, and I'm taking this year of getting my sea legs.
Right.
Um, and so I ended up feeling, like at the end of the day, it was more about um, helping them meet some requirement that they had, which was getting diverse students into the program,
Yeah.
than it was about helping me. And whether or not that is true, it, kind of doesn't matter because that's what happened, right? That's this sort of like thinking, the mindset that you get into when someone tells you these things. Now,
Yeah.
was that entirely true? I don't think so. Now in hindsight, I think that I was qualified to be in this program. But when you're in that situation, it doesn't feel that way, right? It feels like, maybe they just needed me because they needed someone who could fill this quota. And in reality, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like I do think I should be there, but I also think they needed somebody to fill that space.
It sounds like a backhanded warm welcome because
Exactly.
you were being put into a different category. Do you feel like the support that you got was actually helpful? Because you were talking about, I think a lot of first generation students experience this. You were thriving in high school and recognized for your achievements. And then you went to a new environment where the preparation you received was different from the preparation that other people perceived. Like they seem to have access to a whole categories of knowledge that weren't 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 given to you. Like they had the keys, and you had to go find the keys on your own. So I'm interested in that because I think a lot of students experience this, a thriving in younger ages, and then when you get into higher education, like we don't know what we don't know. So if we're not receiving from our parents or the previous generation's sets of knowledge, then it's a search and find mission on your own from scratch, and you don't always know even where to look to find this information. It's so much more work in that case for first generation students.
Yeah, I think that everything you're saying is absolutely true. But I also, I'm thinking about like how I ended up like navigating that system. And to be honest, I think until the day that I graduated, it was a struggle. By the very end, I was like calling my mom and saying, if I quit, I know I only have technically like 2 months. If I quit, will it be okay? Like, will I be okay? Will you still love me, if I fail in this thing? Because to the very end, I never felt like I really belonged or that anything that I was contributing was important. And I think so much of that is because I was still trying to force myself into this mold of this world.
Mhm.
And the reality was that I was never going to fit into that, right? Like I was brought into this space, um, and you know, I was given this award to be in this space, and they expected me to conform to this thing I could never fully conform to. It just wasn't who I am, and it's not who I will ever be. And so I think that that's one of the biggest problems that I had was um, finding help. Certainly I did find, you know, people who helped me in ways. I'd say that I had one person who really, really helped me and tried very hard to help me be successful and really just make it through. When I say like helped me, it was never about thriving, you know, it was really about like dragging me across the finish line and making sure that I graduated from this program, but
Sure.
not actually like, you know, being able to use my gifts in the way that I wanted to use them.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is kind of the biggest problem that a lot of students face is we are really smart enough to make it into this place, right? Which I think says a lot for even if we're getting to undergrad, right? The fact that we've made it to college without any real guidance of how to get there, that means we're really, really smart, that we're
Yes.
battling all of these things that are these barriers to us being in this position and still making it there.
Mm.
And then I think not being able to use the gifts that got us there and the intelligence that we bring to that space, right? Because it doesn't necessarily fit the standards of what this institution demands of us.
Yeah. I do want to say, I'll use my little historian skills here for a moment. Most people in the world don't have access to higher education. Only 7% of the world's population graduates from college. We think of it as more normative in the United States with more people getting access to college, but higher education was created for the elite. And
Mhm.
until after the end of World War II, until the 1960s with the GI Bill, most Americans didn't have access to college. Colleges were created in a cultural environment of elite, upper middle class, or very wealthy individuals who had the leisure to study and not work. Most women didn't go to college and were called like co-eds. It was very unusual for women to go to college before the 1960s or 70s. And because colleges are elite institutions in the United States, that made them white institutions.
Mhm.
So people who were falling outside, I mean, institutions lag behind society. Society shifted, but institutions still tend to be rigid, elitist, biased toward white individuals, male dominated, all of these constructs that don't reflect our current population. There's still a culture that runs through higher ed.
Absolutely. And I think that part of what happens is that, you know, those of us who don't fit those standards, who are not like the typical college student, who are not, you know, the people who this space was created for, it
Mhm.
can feel like we're sort of living these double lives, right? Where on one hand, I'm trying so hard to be this well-adjusted college student, right? I'm trying to fit into this ultimately super white world that is unlike the world that I grew up in. And so by day, I'm this person who like, oh yeah, I totally get everything that's happening over here, even though I don't, and I'm just pretending that I do. And then in the evenings, I go home, right? Or, you know, I talk to my parents, and it's this entirely different world that, you know, they care about me and they want to know how I'm doing, but they don't understand, you know, they don't understand what it is that I'm doing during the day. And it feels really difficult because I kind of, you know, I think we're sort of pushed in these two different directions, and it makes for a really, you know, fractured life. And so I think that takes a really big toll on us as we're just trying to exist in the world and having these like different identities. And, you know, like this other person can say, you know, this other student whose parents have gone to college and these sorts of things, who are sort of, you know, they get it, they can go home to their parents and say like, oh, I'm struggling with this class or this thing's happening, and their parents can talk them through it and help them, make sense of the situation, or even just be like someone that they can, bounce ideas off of. And I didn't have that, right? So I'm going home and talking to my parents and they're like, well, we're here for you, and that's sort of the best that they can do. And
Sure.
it's a lot, but it's still not exactly what you need to, again, thrive in this environment.
Yeah, so you were feeling obviously a little out of place in school, and then maybe a little misunderstood at home too, in a way that you hadn't been in your family before.
Right, exactly. And you know, my parents have always been incredibly supportive of everything that I do. Without them, I couldn't be in, where I am today. But at the same time, they're supportive without fully knowing the struggles, right? So when I am in the last month of my PhD program and I'm begging my mom to just let me quit, it's like she feels for me, but she also doesn't know like the pain of what it is that I'm experiencing. So it's difficult for her to provide, the kind of comfort that I might need in that situation.
Yeah, especially getting graduate degrees, it can be extremely psychologically taxing. And people wonder, like, what on earth are you doing this for? You're not even going to get rich, and you're maybe not even going to get a great job out of it. And so all that psychological duress can seem just foolish sometimes to people who are not in your shoes. So it makes sense, this idea that you're talking about, to go from being the child who was like striving, and even the graduate student and the college student who had these plans at the end of the day and not sure how you're going to get there, but by God, you're going to try every day. We think about the child or the young person who has these traits of striving and caring, and who is on this path to success. And when you get on the path and you find all these obstacles, it creates a dissonance in the individual, right? You're growing up thinking that understanding yourself to be a person who is competent, and then you get into a situation where your competence is constantly questioned.
Exactly. And I think, it comes out in basically everything that you're doing, right? When you're in these classes and you can be asked to do a simple essay, right? Like write an essay about such and such thing. You go in and you write the essay and it's like not what your professor expected of you, or not what a class demands, right? So one of the things that I feel sort of it had a really, really big impact on my journey was the first paper that I turned in for graduate school. I failed it. And that's basically just like unheard of, right? When you get to this level and you're getting this PhD, you're expected to get an A. Like that's kind of what happens, right? In these classes, you get A's. If you get an A minus, it's like, wow, this professor doesn't like you that much, right? If you get a B, don't even think about working with that person because they clearly don't want to work with you. If you fail a paper, you should think about how you're going to plan the next part of your life because I don't think you're going to be successful in this place, right? And so it was a really big deal for me, again, coming from this place where I was doing good in school, like I was used to, in high school, being someone who made good grades. I didn't have to work super duper hard to get a good grade.
Yeah.
And so then I'm in this place where it's like, hey, welcome to grad school. You just failed your first paper. And I really felt like much of it was like learning from scratch, right? So here's this assignment that I was given that apparently everyone else knows how to do, which I don't know how they all knew how to do this assignment because it was certainly nothing I'd ever seen before. And then all of a sudden, like facing failure and having to learn from the ground up, basically how to be a college student the way they wanted me to be a college student, right? And so it's like, I truly had to sit there and like say, okay, here is this paper. this is how they want it. Read all of these other papers and see how they did it, because that's how they want it done, right? And so it was really like, I felt like every paper that I wrote was absolute torture, because it felt like I was taking my voice and then translating it into this like academic speak that was so unfamiliar to me, what was demanded of this place, right? And so so much of it was just like faking it. And you know, they say like fake it till you make it, but I never felt like I made it. It just felt like it was always faking it and pretending to be this person who could do these things, because that was the standard. And of course, obviously, my argument is that it shouldn't be the standard, right? Like we should be making space and room for these other types of knowledge that our students bring to the table, because just because I couldn't say it the way that they wanted me to say it doesn't mean that there was nothing there. It's just that they couldn't see it, right? And so what I really needed at the time was an advisor who could say, I see what you have, and I do think that your voice belongs here, and we need to, you know, work on that, rather than, I see what you have, but can you make it this thing instead of that thing, you know, which I felt is ultimately what was required of me.
Yeah, where you said they wanted you to be the kind of college student they wanted,
Exactly.
but not working with the whole person sitting in front of them, a person who came with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of talent, with a lot of skills, with a lot of possibilities, with a lot of dreams, you know, with words of your own to speak. And they said, no, no.
Right.
Okay, so for students, I'm going to take one moment to say, take a look at the reactions. If you know what Dr. DeChavez is talking about, the reactions we've got down here, we've got hearts, we've got thumbs up, we've got a party icon. Use your reactions. I'm interested to see if this sounds familiar to you, this idea of being in college and you feel that you're ready to go and you're having the experience where your voice is not being heard, where your skills are not being seen. And you can use the chat as well. I do want you to think about when we're done with our interview conversation, we are going to open up direct questions from students for our guest. And so start thinking about that now. We're going to ask you to put the questions in the chat. And then I'll call on individuals by whatever name you have on the screen. We'll ask you to turn on your microphone and or your camera if you're comfortable, and you'll get to ask the question yourself. So yeah, it's nice to see this. Yes, I can relate. I've seen it in social media a lot. This conversation is hitting my whole heart. Yeah. Okay. So feel free to use the chat. Feel free to give some props with the hearts, the thumbs up, and I'm still waiting for a party icon, even though it's a Monday. Yeah, and then we can go back to what you were saying, you know, this idea that you said that you were speaking to, that universities only recognize certain types of knowledge, or talking about how the system operates. If the system was created and designed to operate for the elite, it still operates that way. And so when you come from a background that's not that background, that's supported by layers of privilege and years of privilege and generations of privilege, it's then no wonder that that of course there are interactions that are not supportive to you, and that there is that self-questioning that goes on. So I'll pass it back to you. You were speaking to these issues.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, well, one of the things that I was also going to note is that, interestingly, when I was in these, you know, classes, as I said, I didn't really speak, and kind of felt like I didn't know how to contribute to the classes. Or when I did say something, it was maybe I was providing more of an emotional response than like the academic response that they wanted from me, which I think also, in my opinion, speaks back to like, this is the only type of response that is accepted in this space, right? Which I think is not cool. And really, I think sort of disregards the way that, some of us come from these places where we use our emotions to help us get to these ways of understanding, right? And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I might have been saying, like, I responded to this piece, it made me cry. And, like, eventually it led me to these other thoughts that I was having. And I found it really difficult to not be able to speak from those places, right? Like, if I was going to respond to a text or whatever we were talking about, I had to have like this most intellectual um, thing ready to go. And that's just not
Mhm.
who I am, nor
Yeah.
has it been the reason why I've been able to do well in life. I've been able to do well because I lead from this place, right? This place of feeling and knowing in that way. But what I did find interesting was, like, in my classes, when something non-white would come up, right? So maybe we were reading a Mexican American writer, or they wanted to know how to pronounce a word, like, all of a sudden then I became someone, that was the source of knowledge for them, that I did bring to the table something that was valuable to them, right? And so, later when I was teaching my own classes and I'm working with students, I found it really important to remind them, like, this place, it'll take you for all that you're worth, right? But only what it wants. And it'll leave you dry and just, feeling like you are only worth these certain things, that this is only what's valuable here. And I think so much of it has to do with, it's this, struggle, because on one hand, I'm telling students, like, you need to find your value and your worth and remember that what you bring to the table is important. While at the same time, you're in this space that's like, bleeding you dry, basically.
Mm.
And so it's like really difficult to find your worth in a place that's telling you that you're worthless, right?
Mhm.
Unless it's with these like small things where they find value in you.
Mm.
Um, and I think a big part of it is finding people who get it, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, that was really the only thing. Well, there was two things that helped me get through it. One was spite, and that spite will get you far, right? Where I'm like, I'm gonna finish this thing
Energy.
because
There's an
yes, yeah,
energy. Uh-huh. I'm
absolutely.
familiar with it.
I don't necessarily recommend it because then you need therapy to deal with it, but I do think it is helpful. But the other thing is finally finding your people, right? And it took me a long time. Part of the reason it took me a long time was because they only accepted, so many students, and of those students, there was like three of us who weren't white, So I'm like trying to find my people in this space, and even then, it's like just because someone isn't white or you think is going to be like similar to you, that's not always how it works. Because there are people who come from different backgrounds. Maybe they came from a family with more money, whose parents went to college and whose parents went to college, right? So it really is like having to figure out like who is similar to you, who is understanding things in the way that you are understanding it, right?
Mhm.
And I certainly, like I said, when I was in high school, I had this huge group of friends. And when I was in grad school, I had a very small group of friends because it was different there. It was harder to find people who um, went through this world in the same way that I did. But I
Mhm.
did finally find them. And because of them, I made it through. And if I hadn't found those people, I don't know if I would have made it through. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to graduate from the program and be successful in any way. Um, I don't know how successful I was. I mean, I think everybody says, "Oh, I kind of just like made it out, by the hair of my chinny chin chin," and it was a difficult experience. But I really was not particularly successful. Like, it's kind of a miracle that I graduated at all. It was quite an experience trying to get the hell out of there, to put it nicely.
Yeah.
Um, but even that wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have this like core group who had similar experiences to me
Mhm.
and I could lean on, if I couldn't lean on my parents in that same way, at least I had these friends where they were like, we get it, and like, yes, we see what's going on here too. And we feel the same way. And I think that that is crucial. And it can be confusing too, because sometimes it'll be, like your own people who are leading you astray. And that's a tough lesson to learn as well. But there are people who you will find who are there for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's something that you had to create. For some students, they go to college and it's built in, right? If they're of the dominant population, there it all is for them. There's the parties, there's the fraternity, here's this, here's that. And for you, you had to seek and find. I think about that a lot with the students who attend Triton, because we are a commuter school and people have so many obligations with work and family that they're on campus and they're gone. They're on campus and they're gone. And unless they have a built-in cohort, it is hard to get to know people. But I think your advice is really powerful, to love yourself enough to look for your people, however you define who your people are, and to know that that there are little gems. I always say this on our campus. It's true for me as a faculty member, and I know it's true for students too. In every classroom, there are gems in that room, and so pay attention to what peers are saying. Even in online classes, I tell people it can be so alienating to be in an online class, but we have online discussion. I say just look for that writer whose voice as a writer, is clarifying for you, makes you nod your head, and look for them and respond to them. And next time, look for them again. And it is this bigger effort, and it is harder to find the people in this type of situation, but very worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like, especially in these spaces, I think the younger generations, I sound old saying that, but I think like the younger generations are doing so good in being aware, and not, of course, not everybody, it's not like a perfect situation, but I do think that a lot of students are, aware of these like social movements that are happening and what's going on in politics, and they care a lot about these things. But I do feel like sometimes in an institution, you really are looking for like people who throw out like a certain phrase, or they comment about something and you're like, it pings, and it's like that person is speaking my language and I need to connect with that person. And of course it's like, kind of it can be challenging to put yourself out there and say like, hey, I'm Yvette and I'd like to, talk about this thing. But I do think that it's incredibly important. And I think those bold moves that I made ended up being, life-changing for me. Being able to like reach out to somebody and say, oh, you talked about this thing in class the other day, and that totally resonated with me. I'd love to talk to you more about that. It's a scary thing to do, but also it could potentially be the difference between, you making a connection with someone and you not, right? And so I do think like seeking those opportunities.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about advocating for yourself within the college? Maxie Armis, who's one of the professors on our grant, was asking about finding faculty or finding other supports at the school that were helpful to you.
I think that one of the things that is important to remember is that generally, if we are overloaded as students of color, and faculty are too, right? So the faculty of color is usually bombarded with like all kinds of stuff, whether it's these committees that they're on or trying to take on all these students, So I think in hindsight, I can see like the faculty of color, there were not that many of them in the department that I was in. They were struggling with having to, work double, triple, quadruple the amount that white faculty were working. And so I think that they did their best, in trying to help me out. But and there was definitely, faculty who did help me.
Mhm.
And I think without them, I would not have, gotten to the end as far as, my final papers and dissertation and all of that stuff go. But for me, the bigger connections that I made were through other students. And I do think that I'm a particularly difficult case in that, I really did have trouble conforming to all of it. Like I never was successful. And I think that faculty kind of struggled with me in that as well, because there was a lot of resistance from me, and honestly just like a general inability to do it. I don't think that I had that in me, not because I'm like, no, I don't want to do this, you know, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do, but rather like I see what you're telling me to do and I'm trying so hard to do it and I'm coming up short. Like I just can't, you know, like I can't write the paper in this way because I don't understand the way that you're telling me to do it. It's just
Mhm.
not in my wheelhouse to do that. And
Yeah.
so I think that was met with some frustration.
Well, and you're a writer too, which is a particular thing in education. Like what you're doing is trying to bring your voice in its most powerful iteration to the page and to the world. And a voice is a very personal thing. And if they're telling you your voice isn't right, change your voice.
Right.
You know, that's change your actual self. And it sounds like that's not something you were really willing to compromise on, even though you tried to see where is this middle ground, how can I meet, you know, these expectations. But it sounds like you've always really also tried to remain true to your own vision, to your own voice that falls outside of what this norm was that you were put into.
I honestly don't even know if it was that I was not willing to compromise so much as like I didn't know how to do it, which I think might be a testament to how strong my voice is. But like, you know, I really I didn't get it, you know, and I know that that sounds kind of strange, but I really just didn't understand how to bring these two things together. I tried really, really hard to do it,
Mhm.
but I guess I didn't know what they were asking of me, you know? Like I see the thing, I see the argument. When I tell you the argument, you're like, yeah, that sounds good. But then when I sit down to type it, you don't like what I'm typing, you know? So I think that that was really hard for me.
Yeah.
And ended up being the thing where I'm saying, like, I felt like I was translating every sentence into another language,
Wow.
that language being an academic one.
Yeah. So then I want to make sure that we cover this and then probably we'll move to questions. I want to ask students to start thinking about questions and you can also start putting them in the chat. But I wanted to ask you, so in this journey, how did you learn to honor your own knowledge?
Um, well, I'm going to start crying. The When I was in the later years of my graduate program, my brother died, and it was something that had like a huge, obviously a huge impact on me. And I think when you face that sort of tragedy, that sort of unexpected tragedy,
Yeah.
nothing else matters anymore, right? So I think that I was like living in this world where I was thinking I had to measure up to these people, and then this happened, and it was sort of, it put everything into perspective where it was like, um
Mm.
who am I trying to prove myself to, you know, like if I'm not happy, then what does any of this matter? And so I think that my brother died, he killed himself. And so that sort of put everything into perspective. As I said, like he wasn't happy. He was doing all of these things that were supposed to make him happy and still not happy. And so for me, it was like, well, what am I gonna do? You know, I've been like miserable this whole time and trying to pretend like this was the thing that was making me happy. So either I need to figure it out and like let go of some things, or I might be miserable forever, you know? And so
Sure.
I think in that situation, it was very much like a night and day thing. I stopped pretending that I was okay. And I think when I was willing to say, like, actually, I'm not okay, and none of this has been okay. And, you know, I've been surrounding myself with people that have not actually been supportive in this journey that I'm on. And I need to like respect and honor who I am and let myself exist in this world because I deserve to be here, you know. And I think when I was able to finally take a look around and say, like, no one here is any better than me, like
Mhm.
you came through up through this different way, and I respect that. And I came up in this way, and that should be respected as well. And so because of that, it was sort of like no one's better, like we've all had this like weird journey, but we're all in the same place. And so I deserve to exist in this space as the person that I am. And hiding these things only makes me miserable, and I'm just unwilling to be miserable anymore.
Mhm. I love that phrase, I deserve to be here. Maybe even as an interruption for students, and when that heavy feeling comes in class, when you're in that place of not knowing and not knowing like how to get on the path, right? Those classes where you can feel utterly lost and not sure if you're going to find your way back to the path. It's one thing to struggle academically, but internalizing that struggle and then turning it on yourself and saying like, I don't belong here.
Hmm.
The ability to understand that so many of us go through this. There are many different ways of going through this. It can just be academic unpreparedness. It can also be feeling like the institution was not built for you, which
Hmm.
it was not built for most of the students at our college. Our college is trying to change and to bring our institution into a place that we're really meeting students where we're at, and we're not there yet. We're taking steps, but your message for students to say, I deserve to be here, I belong here, to be asking for help, or to be calling out the college when it doesn't provide that help. I think we need more student voices. I think our students can guide us in becoming a better institution, because it's very easy for colleges to say, here's some data that looks good, and well, we're doing quite well. And what I'm seeing in the chat is so many students relate to the experience that you had and to the feelings that come with it. And those are very heavy feelings to carry around when you're trying to accomplish something.
Right, exactly. And I think that that is, one of the things that not everybody understands, right? Is like, you know, a a privileged student can be in this space and their biggest struggle is like whether or not they're going to do well on this paper. And then you have these other students who are dealing with, am I going to do well on this paper? Can I afford my rent? Also, like I'm trying to help out my parents over here. Also, do I even belong in this place? There's like all these other things that are going on that are making us not as successful, right? Or like not as successful as we could be in these places. And so there's just so much more. It's like just like the tip of the iceberg, when you see a student who's like struggling in a class. There's so much other stuff going on most of the time that they might not even understand, right? Because so much of it is internalized. Like I don't know if I would have understood all the feelings that I was feeling had my brother not died. I don't know if that ever would have been something where I was like, whoa, I can see that there's something else going on here. I don't know who I would have been if that had not happened, right? So it's this weird clarity that out
Mm.
of this tragedy was the gift of this clarity.
Mhm.
Um, but not everybody experiences that. Some people stay in this same mindset and think that they are the problem, and
Mm.
they're not.
I think adding that perspective of if the environment wasn't built for you and your success, that you will, it is normal then to have these sets of thoughts, but it's powerful to recognize what those sets of thoughts are so that you can argue back against them.
Right.
I do see a lot of questions from teachers, so thank you so much for teachers, but I'm also going to encourage some students to put some questions in the chat. Um, you can think of a how question or a why question. So take a moment to think, but I really do, I'm gonna go to one teacher question, and then I wanna see some student questions as well. So I'll give you that little bit of encouragement because Dr. DeChavez really is here for the students. But in the erstwhile, Mrs. Gail Craneville, do you wanna turn on your camera and mic and ask your question yourself? We'll give you a moment to do that.
Hi. How are you? And thank you so much for coming. Um, so how can students advocate for what they need and deserve? Because actually they do belong here, especially in a public institution that their tax dollars pay for. They do deserve to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. They do deserve to have faculty that look like them and an administration that also reflects who they are. How do they get what they deserve and what is actually their right?
I think that I think honestly, a lot of it is the responsibility of the faculty. I think that students should be able to, express themselves and say what they need, but it's a scary thing to do. And it's really hard to feel like um, you're able to do that in the first place. And so, I mean, I definitely think that a lot of it is the responsibility of the faculty, right? Asking students whether if it's that generally, I think anonymously would be the best way to do this so that you're not putting any students on the spot, but asking them what they think about the curriculum, right? Like, was my curriculum, did you feel seen in this class? Do you feel like what I was teaching in this class reflected your experience? Do you feel like there were different forms of knowledge that were allowed to be in this space? But I mean, of course, I think that students should speak up, but it's scary. It's really hard to do that. I definitely spoke up in class. I had an experience where, it was an American literature class, and the only person of color was someone that I'd read over and over and over. It was like the token person that they always put on the syllabus. And I raised my hand and I was like, I don't like this, like I'm tired of this always being the person that we read. There are so many other people. Why do I know that and you not know that, right? And that was a huge, bold, scary moment for me. It's like the only time I remember speaking up in undergrad. And so we shouldn't put that pressure on our students. And as much as I wish that, they would call us out, it just is really hard to make it their duty to do that. I mean, we're supposed to be the people who are so smart, we're telling them what to do. So I do think it is the burden of faculty to be better in any way that they can.
That's a really good point, and something that some administrators who have worked at our school in the past have reminded me is that administrators come and go, but the faculty, especially those who are tenured, are the ones who have the power to change, and so they need to be bold in asking on our students' behalf for those changes. With that privilege of tenure comes that obligation to act in the benefit of our students.
One thing I want to add, though, for students in particular, is that when I was teaching and when I was a student, I never told anyone how I was feeling, right? And I don't know how that might have been different, how my experience might have been different if I told someone, like, this is what's going on with me, right? There was one time where I had to, because I had someone close to me pass away when I was an undergrad, and I did have to say, like, hey, this is what's going on. And the professor ended up being amazing, right? That's not always the case, but you don't know, right? And so the thing that I would tell students is we can't know how you're feeling unless you tell us. And so if you can find someone, a faculty member or a campus group, right, where you can express how you're feeling, that would make a world of a difference, right? Even if it's just because you can get it off your chest and have someone hear you. Keeping things in it makes everything so much more difficult. And so if you could just let people know how you're feeling, I think that would be something that could make a huge impact on your experience.
Yeah, we have a question from Lauren Frame, who's in Humanities 104. And then Lauren, I'll invite you. You can turn on your mic and ask your question. If you want to do your camera too, that's fine. It's up to you. But go ahead and you can ask your question, Lauren. We'll wait for a second while you turn your mic on.
Hi, that was harder than I thought.
It often is.
I was just wondering, what can fellow students do to support their peers in making the experience feel more comfortable and adding to their sense of belonging?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I find helpful, or that I experienced as being helpful, I remember those times in class where, I raised my hand and said something that maybe wasn't necessarily exactly what the professor expected or wanted, right? And then someone else would be there to not let it fall flat, right? And I think that that was this like very small way of showing support that was quiet and wasn't like, a way to for that person to pat themselves on the back or anything like that, but was just like, I see this person and I'm going to make sure that, what they're saying isn't just like disappearing, right? And I found that really helpful. So I think that's one way you can show your support, right? Is like when someone speaks up, continue the conversation, right? I think ways that are not about making yourself like the hero in any way is something that's helpful, right? If you see someone struggling, or if you see like maybe a person's been absent a few times, just like saying, hey, do you need any help? Or are you caught up? Like that sort of thing. Just being a friend, I think, is really helpful. The few people that I am friends with from undergrad are those people who, even though I was like severely quiet, still tried with me, and like wanted me to, or saw that there was something there and that I was worth talking to. And so yeah, just being a friend, I think, is a lot more helpful than you might know.
Okay, I'm gonna, I saw that Professor Maxi Armas had a couple questions that were good. So Maxi, I'll ask you to pick one. And if you want to come on camera, and Mike, you can ask it. And then students, even if they're, I know that asking questions on this venue might seem awkward, but if students who are still on the program could use the chat right now to write down specifically one or two ideas that resonated with you, that Dr. DeChavez talked about, I think it's helpful for all of us to sort of hear some of your thoughts. Okay, so Professor Armas, we'll go to you. And then after that, Cesar Nunez, if you want to jump in, we'll call on you next.
Yes, thank you.
Everybody
And
else typing in the chat. We want to see your thoughts and specific ideas that you personally relate to in your experience. Okay, go ahead, Maxi.
Sorry. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. DeChavez, for being with us today. It's very revealing. Thank you for those testimonies and that input. It's incredibly valuable, especially when it comes to learning. I noticed that you mentioned how, the way you learn was so unorthodox, really. And then you, in spite of it, you succeeded. And that's remarkable. And therefore, my question, in your academic experience, do you feel that the curriculum content was aligned with the diversity, inclusion, and equity factors of your learning style? Because I think this is a very important issue for our students nowadays. And the fact that sometimes as a faculty, we don't know how the students learn, really. And so, especially when we want to implement diversity, inclusion, and equity in our curriculum.
Definitely not. I think that, as I mentioned, I had different ways of learning things than everybody else, and different ways of expressing my knowledge too. And so I think, for me, one of the things that's really important is allowing, different ways for students to express their knowledge. So, when it came to writing an essay, sure, I could spit back the information, and I could, do the, 5-page paper that you needed me to do. But it wasn't going to be the best way that I could, show you what I know, right? And I'm a writer, as Professor Collins said, right? Like I can do this, but also I know that if I was allowed to maybe show my knowledge in different ways, I probably would have shined a lot brighter in classes. And so I think, allowing different ways, different types of assignments, right, that might push against what we typically think is how students are supposed to show their knowledge, allowing those creative assignments in class would be really, really helpful for so many students. You know, and I think that we all kind of like make jokes about, you know, what did we really know from high school algebra class, you know, like, okay, so we had to memorize like this theory or that formula and we never use it, right? So it was a lot of memorization and things like that. And I'm really good at memorizing things, but you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that what I'm showing you is that I'm good at memorizing things. I'm not showing you the way your class actually affected me and things that I took away from it. And so if I was allowed to show you like, oh, I took this sociology class and I never forgot it because it taught me about this thing and I still talk about that thing to this day, but you don't know it, professor, because all I had to do was fill out some bubbles in your class. And so thanks, I guess, you know what I mean? So I don't feel like I had a very diverse or inclusive experience when it came to assignments, but I do think that there's tons of opportunity for classes to allow that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then Cesar, I think you had something that you wanted to express. So if you do feel like doing that, you can jump on now with either voice or voice and camera, whatever you prefer.
Hello. Yeah. So as I wrote down in the comments or in the chat section, what you have said, like in your experience and your story, that's literally what I've been experiencing right now. Uh, I'm going through well, I guess I'm really struggling in a class that I guess I don't think is bringing me any success to what I'm thinking it's gonna be like in my future, you know. And listening to what you went through and like how you had to deal with it because none of your parents really didn't know how to talk to you about it. It is kind of like, I guess in a way, reflecting on what I could do, uh maybe like speaking to a counselor or to an advisor on what I should do for that class.
Yes, so I want to echo the comments about speaking to a counselor. So one thing that I want to add is, you know, I was talking about my brother and how I was going through all of these things and how that sort of like changed my perspective. Well, I should add that largely that had to do with me going to a counselor on campus, right? So someone reached out to me and said, like, you know, I've heard you like talking and stuff, and I think that therapy would really be helpful for you. And so I ended up going to a counselor on campus. That was 9 years ago, and she's still my therapist to this day. So that ended up being like a life-changing experience for me, was being able to talk to someone and just be honest, right? And say like, I'm struggling in this class. I'm miserable about this thing. You know, I'm having a hard time about this thing over here. And just having like someone help me sort things out made it all a lot more bearable, right? Because the reality is that we are going to end up in classes that we don't really like, you know, or that are not going to be helpful to us in one way or another. But we also like shouldn't be forced to like struggle through that, you know. We should have some, you know, someone, you know, like metaphorically holding our hand through that process, right? And so I think that speaking with a counselor or speaking with an advisor and just like having someone provide some perspective on that would be really helpful. But also, you know, again, like the wonderful thing about talking to someone is that you realize that you're not alone in it, right? Because even like someone who might seem like they're super successful is probably dealing with some similar things as well. And so I think for me, that's part of the reason why I'm so vocal about all of this, is because I saw people who were, you know, going through college, and I thought like, oh gosh, they must be perfect. And then when I finally started saying like, hey, guess what? I'm actually pretty miserable in this situation, I found that people started flocking to me, right? And they started saying like, oh, you know what? Like, actually, I'm pretty miserable in this class too. Or actually, this assignment, I don't get it at all, right? And so the more like open people are about this, the more we make connections with each other and sort of just help each other get through this stuff. So yeah, just being honest about it is really, really helpful.
Thank you.
It's interesting in the chat, so many people, when you were speaking earlier, were saying, I can relate, I can relate, I can relate. You know, and thinking about your idea of people reaching out to each other, because I think just underneath the surface, this is more common than not. It's not good. It's not normal good, but it's common normal, right? Like,
Yeah.
not ideal.
I think it also speaks to the fact that the institution itself needs to change, right? Because if there are so many of us who are feeling this way, then maybe there's some bigger issue going on here that isn't a personal problem, but rather an institutional problem. And I think that's why, you know, those of us who are invested in this are working hard to not only reach out to students, but also do larger change at the institutional level as much as we can.
I'm interested in the faculty that are working on this grant are interested in hosting a student symposium that would be in 2022. And what we really want to highlight are the voices of our students telling us why diverse curriculum matters, why inclusive classroom practices matter, the effects of not having them, and the gift of having them. So I just want to mention to students, if you're still on campus in 2022, we're starting to put together planning for a symposium where students can speak directly about these subjects. And the goal is to create institutional listening that can be part of our planning for the future as a college. Much more impactful to me than anything is the direct student voice. And so look for this opportunity. Ask your teachers, especially if you're in one of the grant classes, if you're in Mrs. Craneville's class, Mr. Armis, Professor Brophy, Professor Sammer in my class, ask them about opportunities to participate in this student symposium in 2022. We do have time for one more question if there is one. I didn't see more in the chat, but I thought I'd just throw it out there in case anybody wants to jump online. You can turn your mic on and or turn your camera on. Oh, Rachel Hendry has a question. Go ahead, Rachel.
I had posted in the chat earlier, but I was wondering, would a program where first generation and second generation students could connect with each other be helpful, or be one of the ways forward, possibly? Like, so that it's not just about students connecting with faculty, but students connecting with other students. And I also wanted to say that sometimes second generation students can also be told kind of to hide parts of themselves, or like there's a bias kind of toward both first generation and second generation students. And then there are different types of biases, but basically whatever students can do to connect with one another and remove biases can maybe be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous idea. One of the, you know, I'm technically a first generation student. My brother did go to college. So, I mean, that is a leg up that I had that a lot of other people don't have, right? And yet it was still not the same, right? So like second generation is not the same as like, you know, many people in my family have gone to college. It's still a totally different ballgame. But yeah, I think that that's an amazing idea. Anything that brings students together, right, who might be struggling in these similar ways is, I think, an important endeavor. And I think, you know, the other thing is that I didn't know that these sorts of things existed either, which I think is important for to to note about first generation and second generation students, right, is like not knowing that these resources exist. Because honestly, at the school that I went to, huge school, lots of things that are there, but I just didn't know that they were there, right? So making sure that these resources are talked about to students, because there's a lot of like this idea like, oh, well, we're gonna figure it out ourselves, we'll find out these different things exist, and that just wasn't the case, right? And there were like a couple of different things that I tried to join that weren't necessarily like the right fit for me, but I also didn't know what other things existed. Like I joined an English club, right? Thinking, I'm an English major, they're English majors, maybe we'll all get along. And then entering that world and being like, this is not what I was hoping for, you know? So I think just making sure that, you know, word is spread to as many people as possible is really important.
Thanks for your question, Rachel.
Thank
I-
you.
At this point, I think we're coming to our natural endpoint. Thank you, everyone, for the comments that you offered in chat. Thank you so much to Dr. DeChavez for sharing your voice with us and your vision and your inspiration. I can see that it resonated with a number of students. I'm also really proud to say that I saw a number of former students on today. I saw people from all over campus, from counseling, from advising, and even a group of administrators. We had a couple members of the press on today. And so thank you everyone for being present. Thank you so much to the students who participated, who watched, who commented. It was really wonderful to have you here. And so thank you for the inspiration again, Dr. DeChavez. I think we'll be speaking with you in the future about our faculty working on their syllabi to make them more diverse, more inclusive, and more effective. So
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and it was amazing. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to just be open about all of this.
for sure. Okay, well, that's it. And for students who want to share the link, we did record today. I'll create a YouTube and I'll make that publicly available. So thanks everyone, and everyone have a lovely, beautiful fall day.
Thank you.
Thank you.